Welcome to NavTalk Series 3. I'm Simon Prowse, your host. NavTalk is a podcast where we discuss a broad range of topics which will be inspirational and at times fun. NavTalk, brought to you by the NavWealth Financial Group, helping you reach your destination in life on purpose. So Jenny, welcome to NavTalk and thank you very much for speaking to us today.
Thank you very much, Simon. I'm very happy to be here.
Now, you've got a bit of a unique journey to talk about, and it's probably a bit emotional and raw in terms of the talk, and I do apologise, it's a family member. But there's some fantastic insights in this, which I think would be great to share with the people out there on when it comes to preparing for the next stage in life, if you like, or death, which is a terrible way to put it. And your insights would be most valuable. So thank you once again. So Jenny, give us a little bit of your background and then we'll start with your journey, if you like, when it comes to this topic.
Okay. Well, obviously, in my own right, I have my own small business, as does my husband, and we work in and around the financial services sector. So very familiar with financial advice, which is not an advantage that most people have. And I think that's an issue for a lot of people, particularly when dealing with a situation like we've had to deal with this year. And in regards to the circumstances, I guess we started the year really, really well, and obviously then had a tragic situation when my husband's mum, granny, my mother-in-law, passed away, and that took us all very much by surprise. And not that she didn't have her health issues, she certainly did, but it was certainly, I guess, nobody really prepares you fully for that experience. Nobody sits there and goes, okay, this is what's going to happen. And it just did. It took us all by surprise. And yeah, that was literally what happened. Granny and Granddad were both in aged care. So we had been through the process of transitioning them from their home of 50 years plus into aged care and going through the selection process and all those things that aged care raises. But losing someone when they're in aged care and losing someone in general is just incredibly complex. And there's just so many missing pieces to the puzzle. And that was the challenge.
Okay. Now, you mentioned you're very familiar with financial services and financial advice. Does the same apply to, in this case, Granny and Granddad, and they had advice? And where did they get to on that process?
So Granddad was, I should say, the Shire Clerk of Ballina. So he came from a local government background. So he was a numbers man. And Granny certainly was more of that traditional stay-at-home mum, came up from that era. So they were very aware of money. They had worked incredibly hard for everything they had. As they were very aware of it. It probably wasn't until quite late in the day that we recognised the need for them to get some financial advice. They're from regional Australia, so we did make sure that they sought some advice, but it was more around just portfolio management rather than anything else. It wasn't so much what you would call thorough, complex or holistic advice, if that makes sense.
And part of that process, and we will drill into this a bit more, but was there an estate plan put in place for Granny and Granddad and wills and powers of attorney?
Yeah, so because my mother-in-law, Granny, had not particularly good health most of her life, they both recognised the need to have their wills put in place, and certainly powers of attorney were put in place as part of that process, both the medical power of attorneys and enduring power of attorneys. So they were in place. As far as an estate plan as such, Granddad, as I said, coming from a corporate sort of governance type of approach. He was a wily gentleman, or is a wily gentleman. He's still with us. And he was the one that really said, I want to put my thoughts down on paper. I want to make sure that my family know what we want when the time arrives, when we're no longer here, either one of us or both of us. And so he went about documenting and diarizing and creating his wish book. And that has been around and in the family. In fact, I think if you spoke to any of the grandkids, they would tell you whenever we used to go to visit, that he would bring it out and take you through what was in it. So we all knew what this book was about. We all knew what we had to do should anything happen to either one of them.
And in that regard, I mean, the will sort of dictates the assets and so forth, but this wish book or the wish diary is more to do with the personal journey and what the wishes of that person are for the next stage. Is that fair?
Yeah, look, it was so. Look, I don't know what we would have done without it, to be perfectly honest. It was when you're going through the throes of losing someone you love, you're not thinking about, dotting I's and crossing T's. You're just trying to move through the process. You're just trying to deal with the emotion and also the surviving partner, the surviving person. And so the wish book or the wish diary, whatever you want to call it, he used to call it was his blue folder, and it had on the front of it, it was my wishes. And when you opened it up, it was everything from the sort of who the funeral director would be, the type of funeral that he particularly and Granny particularly would like, the music they want played, any particular hymns they wanted, how they wanted things approached, just everything. It was detailed, but in a very personal storytelling way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, but it's something that most of us wouldn't think about in our journey. And
Oh,
what sort of triggered this in Grandpa, you think?
well, being in regional Australia and not their family wasn't always close by. For us, we're in Sydney, and it's a 10-hour drive to get to them. I mean, obviously you can fly, but it's a 10-hour drive to get to them, and their grandchildren and all live all over Australia. And so when you're a remote from each other, you're not on top of each other, and you don't have the same conversations all the time. And I think he felt that by doing it this way, it would take the pain out of having to make decisions. And I think that was it was so much gratitude involved in him doing it. And it was very equal. So Granny, while she was with us, was always part of having her say in what went into it, even just the little things around flowers and things from her perspective. And it was just those little things that made it so much easier. It took the complexity out of it, and it almost gave me, as someone that was quite pivotal in organising the memorial service, it gave me a mission to sort of make sure I fulfilled their wishes. And I think that was the thing for me more than anything.
So a lot of comfort in putting Granny to rest, knowing that you were achieving what she exactly wanted from that
Yeah.
process.
100%. Look, it certainly doesn't replace advice. I certainly don't want to imply that that's what this book did. It certainly doesn't do that, but it does give you it gives you insight into what the person really wants. And as I said, it also removed any layers of discussion. So, in other words, particularly in large families, and we're not particularly a large family, but in large families, this sort of thing would be a godsend, to be honest, because there's no argument over anything. This is what their preference is. Now, not everything were we able to do. I can honestly say that, but we were able to fulfill most of what they wanted, and that was the key, I guess.
Yeah, okay. Now, in this process, we've got a will and we've got the powers of attorney, and that's controlling a person in life. But when it comes to the death of someone and someone close to us in particular, then we've got the estate that kicks in, and you've got the trustees of the estate. Did
Mhm.
did did a lot of those duties fall in the trustees' hands, and they sort of said, "Okay, well, we believe in this book, this wish book, and family. This is great that you can run with this," or was it really left up to the surviving family to manage that?
So the to answer that, the trustees of the estate were their children. So as a result, they automatically knew about the wish book. They knew
Right.
about all of those things. So that meant there was
Mm,
no sort of break in information, if that
okay.
makes sense. So they were fully aware of everything. I think as far as the lawyer, as far as the being able to deal with the estate planning lawyer that we dealt with or are dealing with still, that he certainly wasn't. He knew of the book, but he didn't know of the contents of the book. But that was fine because it didn't really impact anything he had to do in respect of the execution of the will.
Yeah, so he's one of the trustees, I dare say, of the will, or being a trustee, they're in control of essentially making sure the wishes of the estate are adhered with and managed in a proper manner.
Yeah.
So within the will, we don't normally talk about death and what we want from that. So if you like, the estate plan is got to do with the assets and the split of those assets and how they're to be managed, but there's nothing to do with the death. Is that fair?
Yes, yeah. Look, I think that what as I said, the will deals with the transactional part of a person's life. It deals with the numbers and the nuts and bolts, and I think that's the role of the will, and it's a very legal document. And if anyone's read a will, and I'm not sure many people really have, it's a very dry document. It's very legal, and it's just about adhering to the law and obviously the wishes of the party that has passed away. Something like a wish book is really a totally different piece altogether. It's really about as the individual and their family or community, and I think it's really about the things that go beyond that will, if that makes sense.
It certainly does. I mean, it's quite groundbreaking that your granddad and granny, or granddad and grandmum, thought about this book in itself, and it's not something I've come across in my time as an accountant. Is it something that you think is very important in the process and something that's probably overlooked in a big
Oh,
way?
100%. Look, I can't. I mean, even down to, I mean, as I said, Granny and Granddad live remotely, regionally, I should say, and so for us, you're landing on the ground, and we were frequent visitors. We're very close family, and so you land on the ground, the benefit of knowing that we just had to pick up the book and go, okay, who do we flick to the page that says, well, who's our preferred funeral director and or the funeral home that they would prefer to have dealt with? That like you're landing in a town that's not your own hometown. So that sort of thing just it made such a huge difference. And not everybody obviously is remote, but even what it did is it inspired me along with my brother and to sort of go with my parents and go, look, we need to talk about this because if anything happens to either one of you or both of you, we wouldn't know what to do. And that's okay, but we would rather fulfill their wishes than just apply what we think is okay. And that was the big thing for us.
Yeah, because I dare say it's a bit of a process. You're in aged care and you do have a bad turn and obviously the results are not good. The aged care facility itself deals with life. It doesn't deal with death. And how did they manage that interaction with you guys?
Oh, look, I mean, we're very fortunate that both Granny and Granddad have been in a fabulous aged care facility, and I couldn't speak highly enough of them. Crowley Aged Care in Ballina is just amazing, and they've done everything they could to support us. But the issue with death or losing someone you love, particularly when they're in aged care, is that their role is very specifically, as you said, to look after them while they're alive. And obviously their focus shifted very much to, well, there is a surviving spouse and we must nurture him, we must care for him. I mean, because obviously we want to keep, him part of the family. So they sort of moved to, well, okay, it's over to you guys as far as the next part of Granny's journey. And that became, okay, well, what are we supposed to do? Like, even down to when they could remove her body from the facility, we had to sort of work around, well, what are the rules on this? And there's all these different things, there's all these different moving parts. And it's not the solicitor or the lawyer's role to tell you those things. It's not there's all these different people that are part of this equation, but no one person really is across all of it. And so, again, that was where I found the wish book kind of helped me a little bit, because it told me who to go to and where to go to ask certain questions. But what it also did, and thankfully we have Granny and Granddad have a financial advisor, was I picked up the phone and said, what the hell am I supposed to be doing right now? I don't know what I'm meant to be doing. And she was amazing. Amazing. She was the glue. I will have to say, the glue that helped us put all the pieces of the puzzle together and helped us work through everything. I just don't know how we would have done it without her.
So you were very close to this financial planner,
Mhm.
who obviously knew your parents very well,
Mhm.
and that planner you said was instrumental. And what did that? How did that transpire? What was the sort of takeouts from your interaction?
Well, I mean, the solicitor's always going to talk specifically about the will, just
Mm.
as the aged care facility is going to talk very specifically about the surviving partner, or in this case, granddad. The funeral home talks to you very specifically about the funeral or the memorial service, whatever it is that you're doing. Nobody really talks about how all those things link together. And so, along with the book, with the wish diary, I sat on the phone and just said, okay, well, these are the things they've said to us. And she just worked through it all. And because obviously of years of experience, similar to yourself, Simon, as an accountant, how many times have you been through these experiences with clients, whether it's as an individual or as a business owner? You've seen this stuff before. So you know how to act as this glue, as this facilitator to go, look, that question you need to direct to the lawyer, or that question you just need to pick up a phone or shoot an email and speak to the aged care facility. Or in this situation, there were a couple of things that occurred, and she said, that's okay. I've been given permission to speak to Centrelink. She'd had the approvals, it was all on file. So she picked the phone up and she made the call for us. And it just took all the sting out of the tail in a lot of, as a high emotion, it took the sting out of the tail. And I think that's where people like yourself and the financial advisors in NavWealth are just people underestimate the power of the knowledge you have. And I think, yeah, without it, yeah, it would have, without it, it would be impossible. It would be impossible.
So you really reached out to the financial planner with a series of questions, trying to understand the process for yourself, and that financial planner was able to join the dots
Yeah.
on those various people and facilities and so forth in order to get you sort of to the answers and to the right people.
Yeah.
Um, and in terms of the ongoing, granddad's still in the aged care facility, and how's he managed that journey, if you like? He's obviously had a partner for a long time, and what they were in the same facility, which is
Yeah.
probably a little bit unusual. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I mean, we always had an agreement with Granny and Granddad because none of us lived in right next door to them or anything, or in close proximity, that if, because of their health issues as their senior, that if one of them had a fall, that and they could no longer care for each, one could no longer care for the other and vice versa, that we would consider aged care. And that was an agreement that we had, Michael's sister. my husband's sister, and we all had a long conversation. Everyone was on the same page. Yeah. I think once we got into the aged care facility, it was then really about us going, okay, we've got to make sure we give them the quality of life and the longevity of life that they deserve. When we lost Granny, I have to say this particular facility, and I can't speak for any other facility other than this one, they did level up and really came around us as a family, came around Granddad, and really made sure they were checking in on him, both his physical health, but his mental health, making sure he was still socializing, I think was pretty important. That, I think, was the one worry for us, that he'd sort of become a bit hermit-like in his room. But they did. They stepped up. And even now, they are the facility, the home is still communicating very regularly with us around, okay, we need to be talking about this next step for Granddad, or this is what we're recommending. But the decisions and the choices are always with us. They're not making those decisions for anybody. They're just providing the options and recommendations.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And that's really to the direct family, and that's not so much to do with the will or anything. That's more that these people are
No.
in contact and
No, they've been very good in working with the lawyer, and obviously there's a deposit that you pay that I'm sure Andrew Wem from NavWealth will be able to speak very much about the RAD payment that is made when you go into aged care. So they work very closely with the estate planning lawyer or the solicitor, whomever you're using, and in respect of that. And they've been pretty forthright in communicating with us around everything to do with that. But most of that's done via the lawyer. It's more, if there's communication with us, it's more about Granddad's care.
yeah, gotcha. Gotcha. And in terms of the sort of going back to this wish book, in terms of that wish book, given that it was Granny and Granddad's obviously had a lot to do with it, was it was it specific to each of them, as in the individual, or was it a generalisation? I assume there's got to be a bit of both.
Yeah, well, you're right. A little bit of both. So obviously, being quite senior, Granny and Granddad are in their early 90s, or Granny was in her early 90s, and have lived very wonderful lives. But they knew their own minds. They were very fortunately had their capacities without any issues there. So they knew their own minds, so they were able to document it. But Granddad's issue was, well, you don't know at what point that might go. So he wanted to document as much as possible. So he did. And most of it was, there was some generalizations in respect of, like, the funeral home would be obviously the same for both of them, and think generalizations in those things, but certainly some specifics around particular things that they want once they pass on. And that made it, as I said, a little bit easier. But just even basic instructions on, there's this thing in the cupboard and I want this. I've been keeping that for a grandson. It was just little things like that, and kind of don't really fit into the will because they're not of monetary value, if that
Mm,
makes any sense.
mhm.
From my perspective, when I spoke, and I raised this purely as a small business owner myself, and I spoke to my husband about this, Michael, and we both went, wow, we both own businesses, and there's certain things that fit into your will around your business, but there are things that I would want to happen that perhaps don't really fit inside a will. And there's a section in this thing that I would definitely include around that, because you've got team members and things like that you want to see things happen for, and what you want for the business doesn't necessarily fit into a will. So I said to Michael, I think we'll do something up to include that in there. But yeah, this wish book, as far as I'm concerned, this wish book it's just got a huge role.
Yeah, well, it's from what you're saying, it has got as much power, or well, sorry, not power is probably not the right word, but as much oomph, if you like, as the will itself. This wish book is probably the first place you go to, and the wills later on. It's pretty critical in the picture.
Yeah. I think it's probably important to note that Granddad started this quite a long time ago, and he retired at 60, and which is almost unheard of now.
Mm.
When you think of the fact that he's in his 90s now, that he's been retired for 30 years, over 30 years, in fact. And so it's actually a living document. And I think that's different to a will. A
Mm.
will, I mean, certainly we all need to be encouraged to update our wills more frequently. But if you think about how infrequently most people update their wills, I think the thought of this wish diary or this wish book has the power of it is a living document, and it is much easier. And look, at the end of the day, it was a conversation starter for Granny and Granddad for with their family.
Mm.
And I think that's the important part of us to remember. It was a conversation starter. We all knew what their wishes were, and it just took all the angst out of the discussions.
Yeah, well, angst when you don't need it and under pressure
Mm.
and with everything else going on is probably the last thing you want to make some calls on, that stuff you're sort of not quite sure of. Pretty groundbreaking and amazing that he actually did this and provided a good pathway.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're we're going down the road of preparing the will, and obviously this is a very private matter, and the family, the will creators, if you like, it's very personal what they're doing with their assets, and they're probably kept a little bit guarded in terms of how that might work and look and feel. And I dare say that's got to do with, okay, well, I may be giving one person an asset or a bequeath that is over another one. So it's actually a challenging conversation, especially if it's not equally shared. And I understand that there is a little bit of reluctance out there for people to have this discussion. Are you finding that a lot?
Oh, look, I think the phrase estate planning is particularly. I mean, it's just it's a label, and people understand that estate tends to mean that there's money attached to it. Not all people have that estate as such. I think when you dial that back a little bit, I think it's also quite clinical. When you think about what we've been through, and like we as understanding probate and understanding estate planning are not things that the average Australian understand. On the flip side of that, it's being brave enough to have the conversations in the first place about this stuff that doesn't bring up a lot of fear and a lot of emotion, because nobody wants to be confronted by their mortality. And I think that's probably the thing I'm discovering at the moment is that as someone working in and around as a consultant in and around financial services and small businesses, trying to get people to the table for these conversations is quite a challenge. And I just feel like something like the wish book is a really cool way, or maybe not cool, but it's a way to bring on conversation that is less confronting, and it's amicable, and it's just an easier discussion, particularly with someone like yourself, or like someone like, as I said, Andrew, that deals in aged care from your office. It's just an easier conversation. And I think that if there's anything we need to do in Australia with an aging population, it's have those conversations.
Well, given that it's a wish book and probably it hasn't got specifics in it around assets, it's probably a more light-hearted conversation and something you could probably have a little bit of fun with in noting, well, this is the sort of quirky things I want in my death.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I mean, I have seen a version of this particular wish book, not Granddad's version, but of people that they don't want invited to their funeral.
Yeah.
So there are some people that are quite happy to be quite forthright in their wish books, but I mean, look, I'm not sure that I would spend that much time on it. But I do think, yeah, it is about the individual and their story and their immediate family and their friends, and It's not meant to be a legal document. It's meant to be simply about their wishes, their legacy. I do, however, think it's pertinent that if you are dealing with an advice professional, that they should at least be aware of the document so that they know in the throes of the family going through something to suggest or prompt that they pick the book up and have a look for it or go through it. And that also makes it easier for them to assist you. I know in our instance that helped a lot.
Yeah, yeah. The wish book is a wonderful thing, and I reckon the conversation would be much easier around the table with the family, even if you do it at Christmas time and have a bit of a joke over it. But at the same time, it is sort of creating a blueprint that's going to make it easy for everyone and take the angst away. So it's a damn great idea. And as
Yeah.
far as I know, with estate planning lawyers that we deal with, there's been no conversation of this in the past, and it's something that I think needs to be fundamental, ticked off as yeah. Well, I've done the will. I've done my powers of attorney, which is control when I can't make a decision. And then finally, I've done my wish book, which is all the things that I'd like to see happen when I pass away, and that is one of those necessary cogs in the wheel, if you like.
Yeah, the nuances, I think. It's just those
Mm,
little things, those nuances that just make it more about them and less about everything else.
yeah,
So, but yeah, look, as I said, making sure that you have something like that and have an advice professional working alongside you as the buffer. Because nothing can take away the despair, the emotion that you're going through. So you kind of need that level head, the compassion, the empathy that comes from someone like yourself that can just say, "Look, I understand. Let's just guide you through this." And I think the power in that is just immeasurable. And it's a long journey, folks. It's a long journey when you lose someone, whether they're in aged care or not. But it's a long journey, and there's a lot of complexity around the legality of it all. So you need that. You need that partner. You need that person that can act as a buffer for you. Definitely.
yeah, 100% agree. Being an accountant, a confidential advisor, a financial planner, whoever it is, someone with the professional skills to help and who's been down the road, no matter how good or bad. But for that advisor, knowing that the wish book is there, that would be paramount for them, because they can then give it to the family and present it in a way and talk them through it.
Yeah, and look, as I said, some of it's probably completely irrelevant to advice as such, but it's more to do with the fact that they have the tool, the resource to help you in the situation, and if you're using a good estate planning lawyer or a solicitor, whatever, they know how to do the legal side of it. But what I found in my situation was they were able to explain things that perhaps from a legal standpoint wasn't really coming through in plain English to me. So I think, yeah, definitely find somebody you can buddy, that professional advice person that you can buddy up with that can help you through it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Jenny, look, I thank you for your time today, and I know I've sort of pulled on a few heartstrings in our discussion. I really appreciate your insights into this, and particularly the someone who was at the coalface and knowing that they had this wish diary, wish book in front of them, and really talking about how that guided them along the way, and taking a lot of the angst of those decisions that really you don't know if you're making the right decision, to be frank. And as you said, whether correct or incorrect, that wish book you might have to sort of bring to a modern age if it was written many years ago and you were going to scatter ashes in a weird spot or do something like that. There may be some control mechanisms in place, but overall that wish book or diary created the pathway for you.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely need that sort of thing when you're going through such an emotional experience. So, yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you, Simon. Granny was dearly loved and is definitely sadly missed. But my goodness me, she certainly left her mark on the world. And thankfully, she was able to share some of that with us in the wish book. So there you go.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Jenny, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to interviewing you in another day and another time on a topic that's obviously a bit easier to talk about, and we'll go from there. But thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you again.
No problem. Thanks so much, Simon. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to NavTalk. If you'd like to catch up on other episodes from this series or previous, head to our NavWealth website. Until next time.